Today, there are 2 million descendants of French-Canadian immigrants living in New England. These are our stories. Welcome to the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast.
Venez tous jeunes filles et garçons, je vais vous raconter l'histoire de notre immigration ici au USA, de grands aventuriers de pays étrangers.
Bonjour everyone, this is Melody and we're back with French-Canadian news. It's the final French-Canadian news of the season, so soak it in for now and anticipate its return. We'll start with an article written in French by Pascal Levesque titled Franco-Americans on the Trail of Their Ancestors. Read about what Franco-Americans are doing to preserve our heritage and culture in the United States from a Quebec perspective. Next up, we have a new blog post on Query the Past by Patrick Lacroix titled Exploring the Acadian Peninsula. As the title says, explore the Acadian Peninsula and learn more about the historic and cultural significance of each location. Are you a French teacher? The Franco-American Center in Manchester, New Hampshire will offer in-person weekly French classes for elementary-age students during the 2024-2025 academic year. This after-school program, with locations in Manchester and Belmont with other locations possible, will offer French classes at an introductory level. Qualifications include experience teaching children, fluency in French sufficient for the target language level, energy and enthusiasm for sharing French language and culture, current or previous teacher certification preferred. Over the weekend, I joined a group of fellow Franco-Americans and interested parties in a Franco-American tour of Salem, Massachusetts. That's right, there's more to Salem than the witch trials of 1692. There's also a lot of French-Canadian history and culture in this historic New England city. For example, we learned about the Great Salem Fire of 1914 that burned down most of the homes inhabited by the French-Canadian and Franco-American community, as well as destroying most of St. Joseph's Parish. We saw the entrance to the old parish's school reading École St. Joseph, visited the old town hall where the Subway Market, owned and operated by the LaRue family, used to sell meat in the basement of the building, and the World War I and World War II monument dedicated to the veterans of St. Joseph's Parish in Lafayette Park. Learn more about the French-Canadian history of Salem, Massachusetts at FrenchCanadianSalem.org, where you can download the self-guided tour and check out more about Salem's French-Canadian and Franco-American heritage, culture, and history. That's all I've got for you this time. Everything I've covered today will be linked in the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast episode description. Merci for listening, and see you later. A bientôt.
Thank you, Melody. This week's episode, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Paul Buck. Now, I was really excited to talk to Dr. Buck because I had the opportunity, I heard Dr. Buck speak on a different podcast, actually a podcast with Fabrice Jumont from the book that I was very pleased to be a part of, French All Around Us. And so I heard him on that podcast, and he was telling the story of the area around Fort Kent, Maine, which is where he is an instructor and where he lives right now and has for a number of years. And he presents a really unique perspective on this area because he is not a Franco-American and he's not from this region at all. So he's come about learning about this location in a very, very, I think, interesting way. And he is able to kind of pass along some of the observations that he has made for his time up in that region and kind of what registered with him as to what makes that region so very unique. It's definitely a place I've been wanting to get to for a while. Mike and I have talked about taking a giant road trip. It's not really close to anything, so you got to go out of your way to get there, but it's definitely something I'm looking forward to. And I think after you hear Dr. Buck talk about that region, I think a number of you will probably view it the same way I do, that it's just a really fascinating place I'd like to check out. I will also note that this upcoming episode will be the final episode of our season. Now, Mike and I, obviously, we've gone to the kind of the season format, so the very last episode of this season, I think it's going to be a fun one to end on, talking about a very fun region. So if you want to check out our season finale, Dr. Paul Buck, coming up next week. One of the things that I am incredibly jealous of in hearing your bio is the fact that you speak a ton of languages. And as someone who has spent a lot of my adult life just trying to learn one second language, you please just give us how many languages do you speak and how do you learn? How do you pick up languages seemingly way, way easier than most of us do?
Here's how I will preface my answer. I am horrible at advanced math. Horrible at advanced math. I had a great teacher in high school, algebra 2. I've never worked, and obviously, we're going to keep this family friendly here.
Yes.
I could go a certain way and talk about, I've never worked my rear off, to put it very politely,
Sure.
so hard for a C in my life. And again, my teacher, he was amazing. He would have me for extra, he would have me for extra help after school, and he was wonderful. It just didn't, the neurons were not firing.
Yep.
So, we all have our strengths. There are certain people that I know around here that can lay a foundation without using a level. If I did it, it would be rush. I mean,
Sure.
it would be
Sure.
at a 45-degree angle, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So we're all good at something. And even if we have a hard time with language, as long as we make the effort, I suppose that's kind of like what I did with math. And like I said, I had a wonderful teacher. He was awesome. So I did make the effort, but it just took longer for it to kind of sink in. So with that as a preface, I would just say keep doing what you are, and especially since you have such a link to the language, a familial link to it. Oh my gosh. I mean, that's I'm sure that is huge motivation for you. And how many do I speak? Well, I'm proficient in 6, well, 5 really, but I speak Wolof. If we were to do what we call the actful, it's shop talk basically, but actful is I can't remember what the acronym stands for. I'm a language professor, language teacher, but it basically is the formula or the rubric that we use to determine the level of proficiency that someone has.
Sure.
So if I were to use the actful standards, as we call them, I would be probably intermediate in Wolof. In the other ones, I would be either distinguished or superior, which is kind of the higher end of it, short of being a native speaker, with the exception of English. Of course, it's my native language. But French is the one I'm not native, because you can't be if you didn't grow up speaking it. But as you just saw in the interview that I had done earlier, I was actually thinking in French first. So I kind of want sometimes to take that native speaker piece and say, yeah, it matters that it's my first language, but half the time, because I'm using French all the time, it may as well be my native language in so many ways, just because that's the first language that comes to mind when I'm for certain subjects.
Sure.
And actually have to look for my English words, even though it's, that's my first language. So English, and then German was my first language after English, actually, although my German's not as good as my French and my Spanish anymore. Aber ich spreche Deutsch. Ja, das war meine erste Fremdsprache, my first foreign language in school. And Maryland has a very strong German influence. And unfortunately, I checked the old junior high school. Now it's a middle school. I'm old enough to have actually gone to junior high.
Yeah, me too, actually.
There you go. The middle school where that I attended no longer has German. Neither does the high school, but it did when I was there. And again, German influence very heavy in Maryland, to the point where at Thanksgiving you can often tell someone who's from Maryland, because you ask them what they eat for Thanksgiving. And I will bet you, I would say 3 out of 5, if not 3 out of 4 people from Maryland, despite what ethnic background we may be. And again, me being African American, folks can't see that, but I'm just kind of as a refresher for this purpose here.
Yep.
3 out of 5, 3 out of 4 of those folks from Maryland are going to say they got sauerkraut on that Thanksgiving table. I will guarantee you. And that's how I often know that someone is from Maryland. And again, it's that German influence. I mean, there's been a German population in Maryland all the way back to the first decade of the 1700s for sure in Baltimore, but some folks would even say all the way back to the 1600s. So again, I mean, yeah, food can often be cliche and this kind of thing. No, but sauerkraut, that is on the Thanksgiving table for most folks that I know in Maryland. It's that German piece. So again, yeah, German was my first foreign language. French came after I went to Montreal, because I started German the year before I made that trip as a 14-year-old. Would I have been 13, 14? It was during the summer of 84, or was it summer of 83? I can't even remember at this point. 83, actually. So it would have been the summer of 83. So I would have either been 13 or 14. So my birthday's in June. So yeah, it was during that summer. So after that, I started learning French, started teaching myself. This is pre-internet, obviously. This is in the 80s. So I would buy cassette tapes and just read books and that kind of thing. It had shortwave radio. Of course, today we can stream, but back then, of course, you'd have the hissing and the fading. And the thing. But that's how I listened to Radio Canada International. I mean, that's awesome. That's how I got my French, and my parents, my my mom and my stepdad were kind enough to equip me with a shortwave radio. I asked for a Christmas present, and I was able to listen to all my languages there. And again, today just stream it; it's easy. But back then, you actually had to take an extra step because the internet connection that we do today, starting in the '90s, of course. That okay, so French, and then after that would have been Spanish. And again, like I said, during the regular portion of the podcast, I wanted to do it because, again, it's the second most spoken language in the US. So, and it's pretty close to French, so it's pretty easy for me to learn. And it's interesting because even though I had a wonderful Spanish teacher in high school, and he actually lived up the street from me, up the street and over a little bit. So he was actually a distant neighbor, so to speak. But he was very helpful to me with Spanish. I taught myself, but then I had Spanish too with him at the high school level. He was at the junior high where I was before, but when I went to the high school, he actually went to the high school, interestingly. So I had Spanish too with my Spanish teacher. I haven't named any of my teachers on purpose because if I name him, I should name all of them.
Yes,
so that's
fair enough.
I haven't used their names. He was wonderful, and that was all that I had for language. But this is how I learned my Spanish, though, using French grammar, and I leaned on it heavily because in college, my undergrad was in French and German and Russian. Those are my three languages. Spanish is not in there. I did continue to kind of teach myself, but I took the Middlebury placement test. I just busted myself to really learn as much as I could. I just worked really, really hard at it. I tested in the grad level. Why? Because my French grammar helped me to pass the test.
Sure.
And so my learning curve in Middlebury, Middlebury is a difficult,
it's a great
it's a
school.
wonderful program.
Great school.
Really, really. So I had to really work hard. That learning curve that first summer was steep, but I'm grateful to have actually made it without even having had Spanish at the college level. Now, I did have a friend down in Maryland, though, who was originally from Mexico with whom I had worked, and I'd spent a lot of time with his family, and he and his family, we all spoke Spanish, and that really helped me too. So it was not only my study, but it was also a friend of mine. And so my friend that I had worked with after I graduated from college and just before I'd gotten my first teaching job, he was so kind. And again, I'm not naming any of the folks.
Fair. Yeah.
Yeah, but I could. But like I said, if I name one, I want to name them all, which I would love to do. He and his family, his cousin and his mom were so kind to me. They opened the doors to me and we would hang out. We'd spend time. We'd go to DC. We'd go to Baltimore. And for those who don't know the geography, DC is about 45 minutes to an hour from Annapolis, depending on the traffic, as is Baltimore. Mm-hmm. Baltimore is north and DC is west of Annapolis. But my friend, we basically we would travel, we'd go to DC and I'd spend time with his family and we would eat and speak Spanish and play card games and this and all in Spanish.
That's awesome.
And he would even laugh at the way and again, these are friends. We're friends, so it's good-natured ribbing basically. But he would laugh at my French accent when I would speak Spanish and everything.
Of course.
Hablas español como un francés. It's like yeah, I guess so. It's kind of so, but he helped me too. So between all that time with his family and also just just studying the grammar and the vocabulary and then listening to Spanish language at that time, shortwave radio, that like I said, I was able to test into the grad level. I don't know how I did it, but I was in the grad level at Middlebury. Whereas if it had been a speaking test, I'm sure I probably would have been at the undergrad level. But because it was written and it was largely grammar based, and that's right in my wheelhouse.
Yeah,
I was able to take my French grammar and apply it to Spanish because of the common Latin roots. It helped. So, and I studied a lot of verb charts and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
because the subjunctive in Spanish is even more complex than it is in French. I mean, in French, the only two subjunctive of forms that are regularly used now would be the present and then the passé, basically. Let's see. Je suis content que tu m'aies parlé. A-I-E-S. Tu m'aies parlé. So that's that past tense. And then you have je suis content que tu me parles, which is the same form as the indicatif, but you get the idea. Je ne veux pas que notre interview finisse. Je ne veux pas que ça finisse. Hein? So there you go. There's that present tense. I don't want our interview to end here, obviously. I'm enjoying chatting with you. So, but in Spanish, you have I can't even count them. Is it 6
Oh, wow.
forms of the subjunctive, or is it even 8? I can't even remember that are regularly used. I'm having a hard time even calculating now. In French, if you read Molière and Racine and that kind of thing, you'll see the plus que parfait du subjonctif.
Oh, sure, yeah.
The imparfait du subjonctif. You'll see those. But again, this is 17th century playwrights we're talking about. No one really uses them anymore. But if you read Molière or Racine or anyone, Corneille, anyone from that time period, you'll see them. But in Spanish, those are still spoken. The equivalent of those are still spoken in everyday Spanish. So again, the subjunctive is fascinating in Spanish, and it's even a lot more gray in Spanish than in French. It's in French it tends to be A or B, although there is some flexibility. Mm-hmm. But in Spanish, they're what we call matices, so they're different. They're nuances. It's much more nuanced in Spanish, the use of subjunctive in certain places. So anyway, I don't even know where that went. So Spanish, and then Russian, yeah. Русский язык. Я жил в России, в Воронеже. I lived in Voronezh. Я был студентом. I was a student there.
Now our fathers look at us and sigh with despair, to think that everything they love we simply do not share. But the spirit never dies, our culture will survive. Each of us must choose how much to keep alive. Each of us must choose how much to keep alive.
Special thanks to Josie Vachon for providing the music. You can find more about her at josievachon.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Mike Campbell. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at fclpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at FCL Podcast for more information about the topics discussed. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this episode.